With all this in mind, let's talk a little bit about the promise and limitations of progressive DAs. I support, Larry Krasner, for instance, to the extent that he's definitely better than maybe a GOP or a standard Democrat. But there's also, I think, it's an uphill battle, to say the very least. So what's your perspective on DAs?
I think it's always better for DAs to be less harsh. So I'm supportive of any DA's policy that's going to put fewer human beings in cages, going to separate fewer children from their parents, that's going to end these cycles of trauma and violence that are actually increasing trauma and violence in the future. We know that imprisonment actually increases violence in the future. And so I support that. I think where I sort of differ from a lot of other folks is that I don't see a progressive prosecutor as any kind of long-term panacea or solution to the problems of this system. Mm-hmm. For a number of reasons. First and most basically, the prosecutor has a certain set of tools, and those tools tend to be carceral, like they put people in cages and they convict people of crimes. And many of the solutions that our society actually needs aren't punishing more people, it's investing in a really deep way in the things that actually help communities thrive. And DAs just don't have the power to do that. They're kind of irrelevant to that. Secondly, if I think that while the theory behind the progressive prosecutor movement is that over the last 30, 40 years, prosecutors became the most powerful actor in the criminal legal system. But that theory is true only because over the last 30 and 40 years, prosecutors have been willing and readily able to use their power to crush poor people and people of color and immigrants. And if I did a couple of events with progressive prosecutors over the last year, and I pointed out to them that, let's just take the new progressive prosecutor in Austin, Texas, for example. If that person said, you know what, we have a lot of wage theft in Austin. In fact, wage theft around the country is worth $50 to $100 billion a year. It dwarfs by a factor of 5 all burglary, shoplifting, car theft, robbery, all other property crime combined. What I'm going to do is I'm going to stop prosecuting shoplifting and those things. I'm going to focus my resources on the much bigger problem. I'm going to prosecute all the employers in Austin for wage theft because they all do it every single day, right? And then that prosecutor said, you know what? We have a lot of unhoused people in Austin, but we also have a lot of people like Elon Musk who have 7 or 8 houses or 15 or 20 extra bedrooms in their house. And what I'm going to do is I'm not going to prosecute trespassing for anyone who is unhoused and needs shelter. If they want to go stay in someone else's place who has an extra of more than 3 bedrooms, they can stay there. I'm not going to prosecute them for trespassing because it's morally wrong. It's kind of like a Jean Valjean situation from Les Miserables, right? I'm not going to prosecute that crime because prosecuting a poor person for being poor is unjust. And you can imagine the progressive prosecutor saying something like that. I guarantee you, if that person declined to enforce trespassing laws that wealthy property owners depend on, they would immediately become the least powerful actor in the criminal system. The voters might recall them. The governor and the Texas legislature would call an emergency session, and they would, pass a law saying, right? So, there's no way of getting around the fact that the policing and prosecution systems in this country exist to enforce inequality. Mm-hmm. They are the reason that a person struggling for food with their family can't go into a grocery store and take what they need. They are the reason that the manufacturers of insulin make billions of dollars a year because people who need insulin aren't able to just take what they need. They have to pay for it. If they can't pay for it, they die, right? And all of that is enforced through property laws that are only respected and enforced because they are backed by the force and violence of the state. And so as long as you have a very unequal society, the role of police, prosecutors, and jails, and judges, and prisons is going to be to enforce that inequality. And so progressive prosecutors are not a panacea to those problems, even though they can and should reduce the levels of incarceration in this country back to, let's say, as a start, 1970 levels. Then we can start arguing about that from there. But I don't think they're a panacea.
And I would just add, to that, it's like, well, the wave that we've seen is positive, and I hope that it's the beginning of just a movement that will be able to, take over the system. I mean, it's also something that's, unfortunately, likely in a lot of places to be temporary, right? You win an election here and there, then you lose it, and then it goes back to being an extremely oppressive office as well, right? They're able to revert those things back really quickly to being as cruel as possible.
Those bureaucracies are designed for a certain purpose. They are designed to be mass assembly line human cagers. They are designed to process bodies. And so they're very easy to repurpose. If someone comes in and changes a policy saying, we're not going to cage people who are unhoused just for the crime of surviving, all of the office infrastructure is still in place. Mm-hmm. And the next person comes in, changes the policy, then it's right back to business as usual. And I do mean business because it's a very highly profitable business.
Is there any other areas around the country you think we should look at in addition to Austin?
I think everywhere has its own very interesting and very important stuff happening in these areas. There's 3,163 local jails, and there are 3,163 groups of people, I guarantee you, in every single one of those places struggling to get the jail to respect the basic dignity of their loved ones held inside. And there are movements all over this country to reduce the reliance on police as prosecutors, judges, and cages. And I think there's really exciting stuff happening. I think some of the most exciting stuff that I've seen recently is happening in Los Angeles. There's an incredible movement led by local organizers in Los Angeles, part of the Justice LA Coalition, who've managed to get the county through ballot measure and through lots of other organizing and sort of behind the scenes policy work to make concrete commitments of redirecting resources from the carceral bureaucracies at the level of hundreds of millions of dollars to things that communities need to thrive, like we talked about earlier. That's very exciting. If what's happening in LA can be reproduced across California, can be reproduced in other big urban areas, I think it's very exciting. So I'm really excited about what's happening in LA. I'm really excited about the various jail closure campaigns. Not only do they stop a multi-billion-dollar jail from being constructed in Los Angeles, but they're working on closing the workhouse in St. Louis, which is very exciting. They're working on the aftermath of the Closed Rikers campaign, and I think what happens next in New York City, whether Rikers is shut down or not, will be fascinating. On the other end of the spectrum, you've got cities like Dallas and Houston, whose jail populations are expanding to record levels through a combination of just very harsh, kind of cartoon villain-like prosecutors and judges who are ruthlessly using cash bail to fill their jails to levels that are, yesterday we just got word that the 18th person this year has died in the jail in downtown Houston. And this is a jail that has fake windows because it's more important for people in Houston to see a nice building with windows from the outside than it is to have people on the inside with sunlight. And when you have that level of cruelty, it's hard to know where to begin. And yet there are incredible organizers and activists and others throughout the Houston area and Harris County, Texas, who are fighting against that and making real progress and in little ways here and there. And I think there's a growing movement like that in many cities. So I think for your listeners, I would recommend wherever you live, whether it's Pittsburgh, where there's incredible energy now around mutual aid and jail support and bail funds, to the West Coast, in Portland, where there's incredible organizing happen. Find out who in your community is working on these issues. Who is working on closing the jail? Who is working in a mutual aid group that is helping people put stuff they need on their commissary accounts? Who's helping people whose children and loved ones and spouses are confined in the jail? Who is doing the local court watch program that's watching what judges are doing? Who's working on the local bail fund? There are people doing this work every single day and they need help. And so one exciting thing is just find out where these issues are also local. Find out who's doing this organizing work where you are, who's already working on it, and see how you can help.
And one final thing, I know we have a small, but it's there, law student sort of audience, and your book addresses people in law sort of directly. What's your message now, or what should people know going into this field? Because it always strikes me, like we had Stephen Robbins on, he's a immigration lawyer, and it seems to me like a similar sort of thing, like how do you confront a system that is so monstrous in cruelty?
It's really hard, and lawyers have been, unfortunately, a huge part of constructing that architecture of oppression. And I think the first piece of advice to law students is never allow yourself, through the propagandistic legal education that you're receiving, to become one of those people who is desensitized to things that should shock you to the core. Mm-hmm. Because what our legal system does to people and their bodies and their families is abhorrent. And one of the major goals of 3 years of law school is to get you through a variety of head fakes and sort of intellectual dishonesty and sheer bombardment of normalization. It's to get you to stop caring about that stuff and to get you to think that it's natural, that it has to happen, that there are reasons for it other than politics. And so I think, that's the first and most important piece of advice. And the second piece of advice is do something with your career that you're passionate about and that meets some of the enormous need. This country spends more money on Halloween costumes for pets than it does on civil legal aid for the poor at a federal level. And so we have an enormous need for lawyers in every area of law you can imagine, whether it's helping resist environmental catastrophe, whether it's immigration, the criminal law, civil rights, wage and hour work for employment, labor law. There are an incredible variety of careers you can choose that actually help people, and then you can do that work in a way that is respectful of and coordinated with and in service of social movements that are actually trying to build power in the groups that are most harmed by these systems. And you could do that, or you could do what most lawyers do and further these systems and work on behalf of wealthy interests. And you have to make a decision about what you want for your life.
Right. Well, Alec Karakatsanis, author of Usual Cruelty, The Complicity of Lawyers in the Criminal Justice System, and founder and executive director of Civil Rights Corps, at Equality Alec on Twitter. Thank you so much, Alec.
Thank you so much for having me. I'll talk to you all soon.